My four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Racial segregation had been established by law in the United States in 1896 in the Supreme Court case called Plessy v. Ferguson. Homer Plessy was an African-American man who attempted to ride in a whites-only railroad car in Louisiana. When he was charged with violating Louisiana's Jim Crow law, Plessy argued all the way to the Supreme Court that the law was unconstitutional. In a 7-1 vote, the 1896 court declared that the 14th Amendment did not prohibit state laws from treating people differently according to the color of their skin, as long as the treatment was equal. The separate but equal doctrine created by the Plessy decision lasted for nearly 60 years. At the beginning of the 1950s, American society was separated into black and white. Hotels, trains, parks, restaurants, apartment houses, and even state voting precincts were segregated by race through Jim Crow laws. African Americans were criminally prosecuted and jailed for attempting to ride the same trains or eat in the same restaurants as whites. This lasted until the 1954 decision of the Brown versus Board of Education. Topeka, Kansas, 1950s. In 1950, Oliver Brown was told that his 8-year-old daughter could not enroll at the elementary school 4 blocks away from their house. Linda Brown had to walk a mile and across a railroad yard to go to a separate school for African Americans because Kansas law required whites and blacks to go to separate schools. Brown joined with other African Americans and NAACP, a civil rights organization, to file a lawsuit against the Board of Education of Topeka. They claimed that segregation violated their constitutional rights under the 14th Amendment. They lost their case but appealed it to the higher courts. In 1954, Thurgood Marshall became their attorney and argued that segregated public schools were not equal and could not be made equal. Marshall claimed that the laws were in violation of the 14th Amendment. He also claimed that the only way for the court to uphold segregation in 1954 was to find what, for some reason, Negroes are inferior to all other human beings. The Supreme Court agreed and unanimously rejected the separate but equal doctrine of Plessy versus Ferguson, stating that in field of public education, doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Reaction. At the time of the Supreme Court's decision, 40% of students lived where there were segregation laws. All deliberate speed. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of a gradual, flexible approach to desegregating schools of the South instead of immediate enforceable action. School officials were left to freely decide what the court deemed a prompt and reasonable start without deadlines for them to follow. Reversing segregation was not going to come easily, and the court realized the resistance politicians and school boards would have to its decision. In 1957, Chief Justice Earl Warren and the Supreme Court required the nation's public schools were ordered to desegregate with all deliberate speed. Brown versus the Board of Education would lead to more direct forms of protest against segregation. For example, in 1957, the governor of Arkansas called out the National Guards to keep black students from attending high school in Little Rock. After a standoff, President Eisenhower sent in federal troops and 9 students, known as the Little Rock Nine, were able to enter Central High School under armed guards. Brown versus the Board of Education would spark enthusiasm that would lead to events such as Little Rock 9 to introduce the idea of desegregated schools. Sit-ins would also play a role in the aftermath of Brown versus the Board of Education, influencing peaceful protests to represent change. Brown versus the Board of Education shows the law and court system they have a chance at desegregating America entirely. The legacy of Brown versus Board will forever be the fuel added to the fire to spark events leading to civil rights movement.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.